Well, I got to tell you, this 1882 has seen better days, but it won't go together. And it won't go together because this top lever is a little flaccid. And I'm beginning to wonder if there's a piece of spring jammed up underneath this and preventing me from getting it open. So, fellow carbon-based life forms, let's get inside something that probably hasn't been gone inside of ever. Down the rabbit hole. I'm going to admit to having pre-oiled this thing a little bit and allowed this to set. Because what I want to do is allow this croil enough time to get down inside this head mortise right here. The other thing we got to make sure we do is we got to come in and make sure that the dirt, all of the dirt, is out of this slot. This is a very small screwdriver that I happen to use, this little tweaker, and it's sharp enough that it lets me come in here and drag that out. And I'm dragging all these slots. I have another gun in here. Let's see here if I can get up. Yeah, that'll work. This is the back end of an 1893 Winchester, and you can see all the scrode that's in those screw heads. That's going to matter because we're going to want a properly fitted screwdriver to sit all the way down inside the screw slot. Properly fitted screwdriver, that's the width of the slot minus just a very small amount like we've talked about before. And we'll insert that. So the screwdriver doesn't have any rotational slop to it. And pardon my reach here, I'm going to reach in front. And now the reason why I'm tapping on this is I'm making sure that you can hear the hammer bouncing. I know that I have the screwdriver all the way down on the bottom of the slot. Get my hand down over this. Oh yeah. Pow. All right. That came loose. Now I'm going to show you these screws here in a minute. We're going to put these over to one side and I'm going to show you what I'm talking about the mung. All right, let's see if we can get this. Right there. Ah, pow. All right. There's nothing that says you can't beat on the top of this screwdriver with a hammer while you're taking it out. All right, that's going to come apart. All right. And we'll go after the two trigger guards. Now, this screw is in the wood, so it should not fight us. No, see, it came right out. In fact, most of the times we're lucky if it didn't, here we go. If it hadn't stripped the wood. All right, I'm going to pull the other one. Okay, we had to take these wood screws out first so that we get the trigger guard off this thing so that we can then remove the upper action screw, and we'll get there in a minute. Now when you pull the trigger guard, you pull it this way. So by pulling it this way, it undoes the flex on the back, which allows it to pop out of the inletting. Okay. Now, some of you will notice that I have not taken the locks off yet, and you're right, and the locks needed to come off first, and we'll get there. But what we're seeing up underneath this is just your typical scrode loading from a gun that's probably hasn't been apart in 140 years. More on that later. All right, let's go after the lock here. Bruto, track me over with the, here we go. So in the side here, I want to be right there. There you go, right there. That screw right there. All right, so let me get the vise kind of torqued down. I am really working this one at arm's length today because I want you guys to be able to see what the heck's going on. All right, these locks have been off recently, so I don't have to really worry about, see, that screwdriver is ever so slightly too big. It's just too big. Let me get a slightly narrower screwdriver tip. That'll fit in there like that. All right. And then, there we go, thank you. I'll start turning that. Now this screw is kind of boogered up. They all are. But you'll notice I'm having to hold the hammer back in order to get around that head. So I'm holding the hammer all the way back. Right? And then if I push down on the screwdriver, it'll actually, you see the triggers pop? it will actually begin to move the bottom lock off for us. So that's not so bad. All right, go ahead and pick that up. Yep. I've tapped that out from the bottom. Hold what you got. Okay. Now it's gonna be kind of hard to see, but there's the other end of the hole there. So we'll just take a punch, lay that punch down there in the hole, and just massage this bad boy out. Okay, that sound you just heard was the screw hitting the ground. Now there's typically a tab up underneath the front end of this thing. See, this lock is fused in there. So we'll just hit this one, and we're gonna hit the other side with a little bit of coil and reset. But all I wanna do, this is a metal to metal joint here. That's metal to metal right there. So there's a pretty good chance that that's just scroted out and slagged all the way around the corner. All right, when we come back, I'll have the locks off of it. The second lock can come off a little bit easier because we have access here through the tumbler hole, and we can actually sit down on the back side of that and give it a little bit of a tap. So what I'm doing is I'm reaching through the sear hole, and that's allowing me to gain access to that bottom lock, and it popped off. Same screwed line all the way around. We're looking at the inside of this lock. This isn't dirt. This is all rust. Just this gun needed a little bit of help. Someone's been in it though. I'm going to retract my statement that it had not been worked on in a while, because it's definitely been worked on. There's grind marks in here. There's all kinds of stuff. Hadn't been cleaned though. That's for sure. All right, here we go. Now we can take this off. You hear that thing pop? Okay, so as this begins to break free, I'm going to make a move here, and I want to show everybody something. There is a ring of red rust all the way around that screw. Hang on a minute, I got to set this back in the vise a little bit better. Here we go. Oh. There is a ring of red rust, and you heard it squeak when it came out. Now this one did not have any coil on it. Sorry, I keep banging on the camera lens there. So let me get this the rest of the way out. Okay. And it's rusted all the way around. You see how it's orange? That's what glued it in. There's nothing on this side. These threads were actually good because they've been down in a hole and protected. But out here in the elements, finger oil, sweat, and salt, and it glued it into that hole. All right, so if that's the case, then we should be able to come back, clamp this in, and just very gently start walking this action apart. Yep. We just hold this up there. Oh, that's why, because I got it clamped in a vise. All right. We're rusted up. This comes all the way up to the top up here, so let's put a little bit more penetrating oil on that. Just a little bit. Notice I don't have to flood it. There's a tendency to want to soak the gun in this stuff, and I'll tell you what will happen if you soak it in it. In about 3 hours, you won't have any bluing left, because bluing is rust, and this stuff will do a fabulous job of removing. Here we go. Here we go. Now it's coming off. So that comes off there, and as advertised, there it is. There's the missing piece, and there's the piece that it broke off of right there. There's the spring. Yeah, buddy. Well, we know we're going to have to make one of those, but gadzooks, look at the inside of this thing. Good God. I mean, what? Hang on. Wow. Well, while we got this pig apart, we're probably going to conserve it too, because there's so much dirt in here, the triggers darn near don't even return by themselves. Yikes. We're on the uptight here, and here's our broken part. And the best I can tell from all the rust in the gun is the thing got wet, because you can see here, it's actually kind of granular. So this thing snapped, and it probably snapped because of corrosion on the outside of this leaf right here. So here's the leaf, like this. Comes around the corner and it's like that. And if you're bending this thing in this direction, there's a pretty good chance that a crack right here would cause it to snap. And that's what it did. It just snapped the arm off of it. So a couple other latent design features we see here is that there's a set of, they look like points right here and right there. And those are actually sharp. We're not going to make a spring that's going to look exactly like this. We're going to make a spring that's going to work, right? So what all this is going to entail is two things. One, you do not want that to bend there. You want it to bend here. And here's why. And I'm going to see if I can't get my hands in here. If you make that spring bend like this, it'll break right there. You want it to bend like that. You want my thumbs to be together and not moving apart. And as long as that's the case, that spring will last forever. All right, I got some spring stock here. We got to pick out of this pile what the heck we're going to use. But I'll be willing to bet you that somewhere in this pile of stuff, there's going to be a piece of stock that we need. Yeah, that looks about right. Let's use that. I have lots of spring stock. I collect it. Okay, so we want to make that. And the conventional way to make it is to just take this piece and fold it over like that. And I don't want to do that. I believe this won't, this is the feather spring out of a shotgun right here. This is the spring that knocks the two triggers back, that keeps the triggers laying up against the sear so they don't rattle. I honestly believe that this spring can be made by taking this piece of stock right here and splitting it right down the center like this. I think, let me move this over here. I think we can take this piece of steel and then come in with a file and file this down like this. And as we're filing this down, we're doing a couple of things. It is extremely important that a spring never gets larger. There can be no discontinuities in the flow of this. So we'll file this down, and what that'll leave us with is our points right here. So now we're going to have a piece of steel that looks like this, and I'm going to exaggerate this mightily with the 2 points right there. Okay? Then we'll take a hacksaw and we'll just cut right through here, and we'll part this thing right down the middle like this. This is how I think I'm going to do this. Now we're going to leave everything attached down here. We're going to leave this long because you got to have a place to hang on to this thing while you're building it. But once we're all done with that, we'll heat it up. Let me get to a little different place here. Let me get another, okay. So this is 1, this is 2. We're going to put 3 over here. We'll heat this thing up and we'll bend the limbs out on it like this, so that that hacksaw cut will now become wider and the points will be facing that way. Then we'll come in with a round file and we'll make sure that the bottom of that hole is round. We don't want that to be a sharp point there. That's a stress riser. Then we can come in with a little bit of crocus cloth and a file and perhaps file this down because you don't want any lines. So let's look at a flat spring here. You don't want anything cutting across this because every one of these little cross hatches is a stress riser. Let's go back to that picture for a second where I showed you the points. You can see here there's cross hatching on this, and this might have been why this spring failed. These things need to be smooth and beautiful and no discontinuities in the thickness. This needs to start out thick and get thin. Start out thick and get thin. But that needs to be a constant taper. And there you go. A thing to note here is that now that we've kind of done the engineering and our thought process behind this, let's start the conservation on this thing. Let's start just really quick. Let's get this thing cleaned up so that it's sitting there running in the tub while we're also dual using the time fabricating the spring. Oh, baby. Lead pot casting, Mark 1, Mod 0. We're going to take this spring, I've kind of polished it, and we're just going to set it in there and we're going to let it float. So what's going on is we now have total conductive heat transfer. Now the steel is lighter than the lead. So as this steel sits in here, its differential mass is going to be absorbing heat until the entire part is at one temperature. Now you'll say, well, the thermometer was about 40, 50 degrees warmer than the book says to make it. Yeah, but my equipment on this day, in my experience, about 610, 620 on that thermometer is what it takes to give me the spring temperature I want on any given day in Charleston. So we're just gonna I've got to melt this lead off of my pliers there, you see. But the color is now changing. It's going into being a blue, and we're gonna let it sit there for a couple of minutes. And it's one way of tempering back a spring. There are other ways. You can do it with that hot salts, like I did it in when we did the strawing on the Luger. You can do it. You could do it with a torch. The problem is when you do it with a torch. See, it's just floating there. It ain't going anywhere. When you do it with a torch, the mass is different. So we're just going to call that. I'm going to let it go. Now, always err on the high side. If you think you're a little too hot, go ahead and do it, because if you get it wrong, the spring will just be too soft and it'll collapse down on you. If you get it wrong, then the spring is too hard and it will snap. All right, back over to the bench. We'll get this thing polished off and I'll show you what it looks like. Well, while we were doing all that happiness, we got the gun out of the soup, and as you can see here, it's a lot cleaner. It's all been put together. Feather spring, the two triggers, various parts. Something I want to point out, this particular Remington has two features. It has spring-loaded firing pins, which means these will retract, and it has rebounding locks, which means when the sear is down, this lock can actually come forward, hit the firing pin. When you turn the sear loose, that locks back in, keeps the hammers from coming in. So you can, I think the feature is that if you actually hit the hammer, it won't come forward. You have to actually have your finger on the trigger. And that firing pin will come down, knock the rear end of the hammer will come down, knock the rear end of the firing pin, it goes into the primer, and then the whole thing backs off to allow you to break the gun open. Earlier guns, Lefevre's, et al., did not have spring-loaded firing pins and had marginally rebounding locks. And I think the only reason why they rebounded was because the hammers were such a loose fit on the spindles that it was all sloppy. If you dry fire a gun like this, you will eventually do one of two things. You'll break this firing pin right here where it transitions diameter, and you will wind up dimpling the faces of the receiver out. I'm going to reach over the top here and grab some. You'll wind up pushing these out, and the firing pins will wind up stuck out of here. So if you don't break the nose off the firing pin, you wind up with a volcano right here. That'll happen on older guns if you drop the hammers a lot, and then you wonder why the heck the gun doesn't work anymore, because it was made in the 1880s. Okay, I'm gonna put this back in the vise there. All right, Bruno, do a pan over. Get me on the vise there, and we're gonna talk about this spring we just made. There we go. A little bit of focus action, and we're golden. All right. I've spared you guys all of the grunting and groaning and putting this spring back in. But this is a very, very unique setup. The spring is vertical. Most of these guns, the spring is laid out this way, and it requires you to remove end grain wood face grain wood in order to put it in. This thing has actually got a lot of engineering in it. So there's two things that have to happen. I'm gonna hold my finger down and I'm gonna show you why this has to be captured. This lever is now free to move all the way over, and it's got a lot of preload on it. So I got this right. That spring's in there. Now the reason why I've got to hold my finger on it is because in the head of the stock, let's see, let me get the light on it right there. This slot is actually cut out, and that captures the rear end of this. So this is what that looks like. Is held in position by that slot I showed you in the stock. So when that sits in there like that, this thing is free to move. And there it is, we're done. Let me get this thing together again. A member of our team loaded me some full brass shells, and I'd be right interested to see what the heck's inside these things. We're outside, 1882 Remington. We're gonna find out whether or not any of Andrew's shells work, but it's all part of testing. I'm not just gratuitously shooting this thing. So we'll put one in the right chamber, but we'll cock both barrels. The left barrel is empty, and what we want to make sure is that this left hammer is going to hang under recoil. The left hammer stayed up, so we'll open. We'll put a live round now in the left barrel. We'll cock both hammers. We want to make sure the right hammer stays up this particular time. Right hammer stayed up. That's a successful retest, and I'm going to tell you what, it's time for a cigar. 1882 Remington. Top lever spring functions now. Gotta love that. It's got rebounding locks on it, so when you let the hammer down, you can hear that sneak back. This is a right interesting piece of gear, and it was an interesting history lesson for me because I'd never been down inside one of those things. And it has been a privilege, as always, to show you guys this stuff. Stand by for updates. Some of you folks have probably noticed that I'm not real sharp on answering emails because I'm up to my earlobes in work to do. My best apprentice, Casey, got offered an opportunity to go work at the Port of South Carolina as an apprentice, an actual career that he can actually support his family with at his age. So I let him go. However, I've got about 150 email conversations open right now. So if I haven't answered you, it's not because I don't care, it's just because I'm trying to get some work out of this shop and I can't be sitting down finger futzing my keyboard all day. So just bear with me. I really appreciate it, guys. It is a pleasure to work with you. The real important thing is that if I didn't hit anything, I probably scared it to death.